All right, let's dive into a world where, like, even dust can cause huge problems. We're talking pharmaceutical manufacturing. We're going to deep dive into Subpart C of 21 CFR Part 211 today. From what I understand, it's all about making those facilities totally contamination-proof, like fortresses.
Yeah, it really is fascinating. Every single little detail matters, from the building layout to even like the plumbing. It's all about making sure the meds we all need are safe and effective too, of
So
course.
we're talking more than, like, just basic cleaning, right? This is a whole other level.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. You wouldn't mix cake batter in the same bowl you just washed your paintbrushes in.
Right.
That's
No.
basically what we're trying to avoid here.
Hmm.
Cross-contamination is a huge deal in pharmaceutical manufacturing, and these regulations are all about stopping that, like at every single step.
That makes sense. So
Right.
where do we even start with something as complex as, like, facility design?
Well, the building layout itself is really the first line of defense. Subpart C requires separate areas for the different stages of manufacturing. So imagine like designated rooms for weighing ingredients, mixing, tableting, coding, and packaging, each one with its own controls to keep everything separate.
Oh, okay. So it's like a dance almost.
Hmm.
Workers and materials moving in a very specific way to prevent mix-ups.
Exactly. And you know what else is really important?
What's that?
Lighting.
Oh. I have to admit, lighting wasn't the first thing I thought about when we started talking about pharmaceutical regulations, but now I'm curious, like, what's the big deal with lighting?
Well, think about it. What if you had a dimly lit area and someone's trying to see the difference between two very similar powders?
Oh, that's a good point.
Right. A mistake there, that could be a really serious dosage error. So Subpart C says you have to have good lighting everywhere, not just so people can see, but to prevent those kinds of mix-ups and make sure everything's done accurately.
Wow, it's like you're building safety right into the environment.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we've got the layout, we've got the lighting. What about ventilation? Is that part of this too?
Oh, absolutely. Ventilation is critical. And I don't just mean keeping the air fresh, although, that is important. Subpart C requires systems that really control the air pressure, temperature, humidity. And of course, you have to filter out microorganisms, dust particles, all of that.
It makes me think of those, like, high-tech labs you see in movies where they're dealing with, you know, dangerous viruses.
That's actually a really good comparison. The level of control is very similar. You have to remember, even microscopic contaminants can be a problem. Creating that super controlled environment, that's essential.
Wow. Okay. So we've talked layout, lighting, and ventilation. What's next?
Well, speaking of contamination, sanitation is another big part of Subpart C.
Okay, let's talk about that for a second. What kind of sanitation procedures are we talking about?
We're talking about everything. Cleaning schedules, cleaning methods, even the equipment and the specific materials you use. Everything has a detailed procedure. How you clean every surface, every piece of equipment, instructions for what kind of cleaning agent to use, how long it needs to sit, how to rinse. It's very thorough.
So it's not just, like, wiping things down. There's a real science to this.
Absolutely. And it goes even further than that. You know what can be a big source of contamination?
What's that?
Pests. Just a single fly or a rodent can introduce contaminants. That's why Subpart C requires pest control programs.
It's like a fly or a mouse. That could shut down a whole operation. That seems a little extreme.
It does, yeah. But remember, public health is at stake here. Even a little pest could carry microorganisms that could compromise the medication. And those FDA inspectors, they look for any sign of pests.
Oh, speaking of inspectors,
Yeah.
I'm curious, how do they actually evaluate all of this? Are they like pharmaceutical detectives going over everything with a fine-tooth comb?
That's a good way to put it. They're incredibly detail-oriented. They look at everything. Building blueprints, sanitation logs, air filtration systems, even where the equipment is placed. They're not just looking for a clean facility, they're evaluating the whole system. They're looking to make sure it's designed and operated to prevent any contamination at every step.
So it's not just a quick check. It's a full-blown investigation.
Exactly. They're looking for evidence that the whole facility is operating like that contamination-proof fortress we talked about, that there's this culture of quality built into everything.
It's amazing. I never realized how much goes into making sure the medications we take are safe.
It's a whole world behind the scenes, but a really important one. And honestly, we've just scratched the surface here. There's so much more to Subpart C. Even plumbing is a big deal.
Really? Plumbing. That's
Yeah.
not something I would have thought of. Why is plumbing important?
Well, believe it or not, Subpart C has a whole section just about plumbing. It's all about preventing backflow. That's when wastewater gets mixed with the water used for manufacturing.
Oh, wow.
Imagine if contaminated water somehow got into the drug production. Total disaster.
Yeah, that'd be a nightmare scenario.
Exactly. So these regulations, they're all about making sure that never happens, that the water is pure, protected, and that there's no way for backflow to occur. They're eliminating any chance for contamination, even the smallest possibility.
It's amazing how every little detail, even plumbing, plays such a critical role in all of this. It's like a giant puzzle where every piece has to fit perfectly to make sure the final product is safe.
You got it. And as we keep going with this deep dive, you'll see how all these pieces are connected. Building layout, lighting, ventilation, sanitation, even plumbing, it all works together to create that fortress of protection.
All right, I'm ready to go even deeper into this fortress. What else does Subpart C have in store for us?
Well, so far we focused on the physical environment, but there's another really important element we need to look at. Materials.
Materials. You mean like the materials they use to build the facility?
That's part of it, but it goes way beyond that. We're talking about everything. The materials used to build the facility itself, the containers they use for the drugs, the closures, everything. Any material that comes into contact with the medication or that's even just present in the manufacturing environment, Subpart C covers it all.
Wow, I never would have thought that even the materials could be a contamination risk. Can you give me an example? Like, what would be a bad material to use in a pharmaceutical facility?
Let's take something as simple as paint. You can't just use any old paint in a drug manufacturing facility. It has to be a special kind that won't flake off. Imagine if little bits of paint ended up in the medications. Not good.
Yeah, no kidding.
Right. And on top of that, it has to be able to hold up to all the cleaning and sanitizing. You don't want the paint degrading and getting into the products.
So even choosing the right paint is a whole science.
You got it. And it's the same story for every other material. The flooring, countertops, even the sealant they use around the windows and doors, everything has to meet these specific requirements.
It sounds like there's a lot to keep track of.
There definitely is. But the goal is to create an environment where nothing is left to chance. Every detail, every material, it's all thought out to minimize any risk.
So you mentioned containers and closures earlier. What makes them so important?
Well, they're like the final layer of protection for the medication, so they have to be just as carefully chosen as any other material in the facility. I mean, a pill bottle might seem simple, but it has to be made of a material that won't contaminate the medicine. It has to be sealed perfectly, and it has to be compatible with how they sterilize everything.
It's amazing how much thought goes into something like a pill bottle. It's not something you really think about every day.
Right. But remember, we're talking about people's health. Every detail matters. And speaking of details, we need to talk about data integrity.
Data integrity.
Yeah.
Now, how does that fit into facility design?
It's all connected. Okay, so while Subpart C doesn't talk about electronic data integrity in the same way that 21 CFR Part 11 does, the physical environment can really impact how reliable and secure the data is. Think about it. If the temperature or humidity controls in a storage area mess up, the medications could be damaged. And that means any data you're getting from that area could be wrong too.
Oh, I see. So even if the computer system is working fine, the data could be bad because of a problem with the building itself.
Yeah, exactly. Or imagine a power outage that takes out a computer system. If there's no backup power or a plan for recovering the data, you could lose critical information. That could lead to compliance problems and even safety concerns.
It's like a domino effect. One problem can lead to a whole bunch of others.
That's a great way to think about it, and that's why you need to think about compliance in a holistic way. You can't just focus on the computers, you have to consider how the physical environment and the computer systems interact. It's all one big picture.
Okay, I'm starting to see how it all ties together. So, Subpart C helps make sure the data is good by creating a controlled, secure environment where records can be kept accurately.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key point in Subpart C, maintaining a state of control throughout the entire facility.
State of control. What does that even mean? It sounds kind of vague.
It basically means you have to show that you have a system in place to watch everything, adjust as needed, and document every critical part of how the facility operates. You can't just have the right equipment and procedures. You have to prove that they're working the way they're supposed to all the time.
So it's like constantly checking the facility's pulse.
Exactly. Think back to those ventilation systems. Subpart C doesn't just say you have to have ventilation. It says you have to monitor it and document that it's maintaining the right air pressure, temperature, and humidity. All that documentation, it becomes part of the facility's history and shows they're committed to getting better all the time.
So it's not just about fixing problems when they happen, it's about preventing them in the first place and constantly improving the system.
That's exactly what Subpart C is all about. It's about creating a culture of quality where everyone is responsible and working toward the same goal, which is to produce safe and effective medications. And that's where the inspectors come in. They know how important the physical environment is to data integrity, and they're looking for proof that companies are taking a comprehensive approach.
It sounds like a tough job.
It is, but a really important one. They're protecting all of us, one inspection at a time. As we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want you to remember something really important. Subpart C, it's not just a bunch of rules, it's really a blueprint for building quality and safety into every single part of how pharmaceuticals are made. It's about understanding why the regulations exist and being proactive about managing risk.
And that's exactly what we're doing here, right? Exploring the why and all the fascinating details behind these regulations.
You got it. And we're just getting started. There's so much more to discover as we continue this deep dive. So we've covered a lot about how facilities are designed to prevent contamination. But now, let's talk about something you might not expect: equipment.
Equipment? You mean the machines that actually make the meds? I didn't think that would be part of building and facilities regulations.
You might be surprised. Subpart C has a lot to say about equipment. It's not just about having the right machines, it's about making sure they're designed, installed, and maintained in a way that minimizes the risk of contamination.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of specific requirements are we talking about?
Well, for one thing, the equipment has to be made of materials that won't react with the drugs. Think like stainless steel or special plastics. We don't want chemicals leaching from a mixing tank into a batch of medicine, right?
Right, that would be bad. So it's similar to those material requirements we talked about for the building itself, but now we're talking about the equipment.
Exactly. And the way the equipment is designed is super important too. It needs to be easy to clean with smooth surfaces, no little hiding spots for residue to build up. Imagine those machines that fill vials and seal them. Every single part needs to be accessible for cleaning and inspection.
So no rusty old machines covered in dust.
Nope, not at all. The FDA wants to see clean, well-maintained equipment that's designed for the specific task it's being used for. And speaking of maintenance, Subpart C says you have to have regular calibration and preventative maintenance programs for all equipment.
Oh, so making sure everything is working properly and catching any problems early.
Yep, exactly. And all of that requires a lot of documentation, right?
So it's like a paperwork nightmare.
It can be a lot, but there's a good reason for it. Those records are like a trail of breadcrumbs. They prove that the equipment is working right and that any problems have been looked into and fixed. It all comes back to that culture of accountability and quality.
Okay, I see how it all connects. But let's step back for a minute. We've talked about building layout, lighting, ventilation, sanitation, plumbing, materials, and now equipment. It feels like a lot.
It really is comprehensive. And honestly, this is just the tip of the iceberg with Subpart C. But even from what we've discussed, you can see how much detail and thought goes into designing and operating a pharmaceutical manufacturing facility.
It's like building a fortress to protect those medications with layers and layers of safeguards.
That's a great way to put it. And remember, as you continue learning about this, Subpart C is more than just rules. It's a guide to building quality and patient safety into everything a pharmaceutical company does.
And that's what's really important, right? Making sure those medicines are safe and effective for the people who need them.
Absolutely. And since we're talking about safety and effectiveness, there's one more piece of Subpart C we need to talk about: how these facilities handle materials.
Materials. We already talked about materials, didn't we? Like what the building is made of and what the medicine is stored in.
We did touch on that, yeah. But there's more to it. Subpart C also covers how materials move in and out of the facility. Raw materials coming in, finished product going out, and everything in between. It's a very controlled process to make sure there are no mix-ups, no contamination, and no other problems.
Okay, I'm following you. So what does Subpart C say about managing all those materials?
Well, one of the big things is labeling and storage. Imagine a warehouse full of drums and containers, each with a different ingredient or chemical. If those things aren't labeled correctly and stored properly, it could be a real disaster.
Oh yeah, I can see that. You wouldn't want someone grabbing the wrong ingredient and messing up a whole batch of medication.
Exactly. So Subpart C has strict rules about labeling. Every label needs to have certain information and it has to be durable and easy to read.
So no scribbling on sticky notes.
Definitely not. The FDA is very serious about labeling. And then there's how things are stored. Some materials need to be refrigerated, some have to be protected from light or moisture. Subpart C has guidelines for all of that, making sure that every material is stored in a way that keeps it safe and prevents contamination.
Keeping track of all that sounds like a logistical nightmare.
It can be, but that's why you need a really good system in place. And those FDA inspectors, they'll be checking for anything that's out of place. They'll look at labels, inspect storage areas. They'll go over the entire materials management process very carefully.
So it's not enough to just have the procedures written down. You have to actually follow them perfectly.
Exactly. And it's not just labeling and storage. Subpart C covers things like sampling and testing the materials. Every ingredient has to meet certain requirements before it can be used to make the medications.
It's like each material has its own passport and has to go through customs before it can be used.
That's a good way to think about it. And there are also strict rules about what happens if a material is rejected. Maybe it doesn't meet the standards or there's a suspicion it's contaminated. That material needs to be clearly marked and kept separate so it doesn't get used by accident.
It's all about minimizing risk every step of the way.
That's the goal. And all of this leads to another crucial part of materials management: documentation.
Documentation. I'm starting to notice a pattern here.
You're right. Documentation is crucial for everything in pharmaceutical manufacturing, and materials management is no exception. Subpart C says you need detailed records for every part of the process, from when the raw materials arrive to when any waste is disposed of.
So things like logbooks, batch records, all those forms that everyone loves to hate.
Yep, all of that. But those records are important. They tell the whole story of every material that comes into and leaves the facility. If there's a problem with a product or someone suspects contamination, those records can help track down what happened.
It's like a detective story. And the documents are the clues.
That's a great way to put it. And those records are also proof that the facility is following the regulations. When the FDA comes to inspect, they'll want to see evidence that everything is being handled properly.
Okay, I'm really starting to see how important this whole materials management thing is. It's more than just staying organized. It's about protecting the quality of the medications and keeping patients safe.
You got it. And as we continue our deep dive, you'll see how all these pieces connect. Facility design, equipment, materials management, documentation, it all works together to make sure the medicines we take are safe and effective.
Okay, I'm ready to dive even deeper. What's next on our journey through Subpart C?
Well, now that we've covered the physical parts of the facility and how materials are handled, let's talk about another important piece: production and process controls.
Production and process controls. What does that even mean?
It's about how the medications are actually made, the steps involved, the controls that make sure each batch is consistent and meets the quality standards, and all the documentation that goes with it. This is where the ideas we've been talking about are actually put into practice.
Okay, it sounds like Subpart C really does cover everything about the manufacturing process.
It really does, because every little step, every single detail can affect the quality and safety of the final product. So let's explore this world of production and process controls and see what Subpart C has to say about it.
Lead the way. I'm ready.
First things first, Subpart C says that each step of the manufacturing process has to be clearly defined and written down in a document called a master production and control record. Think of it like a super detailed and precise recipe for making the medicine.
So it's more than just a list of ingredients and instructions.
Way more. This document outlines every single step, from weighing and mixing the ingredients to packaging and labeling the finished product. It includes all the instructions, descriptions of the equipment that's used, the checks that need to be done during the process, and the standards the product has to meet.
That sounds incredibly thorough.
It is. And that's because it's how they make sure that every batch of medication is made the same way, with the same quality. Every batch has to follow that master production and control record exactly. No changes are allowed unless they're documented and there's a good reason for them.
So no improvising in the pharmaceutical world.
Definitely not. The risks are way too high for that. And you can bet that the FDA inspectors will be checking those batch records very carefully to make sure everything was done by the book.
So it's not just about having the right procedures, it's about proving you followed them.
You got it. And speaking of following procedures, Subpart C also requires specific checks during each step of the manufacturing process. They're called in-process controls.
In-process controls, what are those?
They're basically tests and checks that are done while the medication is being made. These checks make sure everything is going as planned and that the product is meeting the quality standards. Things like checking the pH of a solution, weighing tablets, or inspecting the vials to make sure they look right.
So they're like built-in quality checks.
Exactly. And it's not just random checking. It's all planned out and documented. They have specific plans for how many samples to take, what tests to use, and what the results should be.
So the idea is to catch any problems before they become big problems, right?
Yeah, that's right. And those in-process controls also provide data that can help track trends and figure out ways to improve things. By looking at that data over time, manufacturers can fine-tune their processes and make them even more reliable.
It's like a constant cycle of checking and improving.
Exactly. And that's a big part of what good manufacturing practice is all about. And remember, all of the procedures, the controls, the data needs to be carefully documented.
Documentation, documentation,
Yeah.
documentation. It's everywhere.
I told you it's a big deal. It's the proof that you're doing everything right. The FDA inspectors will want to see records of all those in-process controls, the test results, anytime something didn't go according to plan and why.
So it's not just about doing things right. It's about proving you did them right.
Exactly. And that leads us to another important part of production and process controls, validation.
Validation. Okay, what does that mean in this context?
Validation means proving that a process or system can consistently produce a product that meets all the quality standards. It's how we know that the manufacturing process is strong and reliable.
So you can't just assume a process will work. You have to actually test it and show that it does.
That's exactly it. And Subpart C has rules about how validation is done, like what kinds of studies need to be done, what data to collect, and what documents to create.
It sounds like a pretty involved process.
It is, but it's absolutely necessary to make sure the medicines we take are safe and effective. And you can be sure those FDA inspectors will be looking closely at the validation records.
It's not just about going through the motions. It's about really understanding the process and proving that it can consistently make high-quality products.
You got it. And now let's talk about another important element of production and process controls, change control.
Change control, what's that all about?
Well, it's all about managing any changes that are made to the manufacturing process. Things change all the time in the pharmaceutical world. New technology comes out, new equipment, new scientific discoveries. So there needs to be a system for making sure that any changes are evaluated and implemented in a controlled way.
So you can't just decide to try something new on a whim.
Nope, not at all. Subpart C requires a formal change control process. Any changes to the manufacturing process have to be documented, reviewed, and approved before they can be put into action. This helps make sure that any risks from the change are identified and addressed, and that the change won't affect the quality of the product.
It sounds like there's a lot of red tape involved.
There can be, but there's a good reason for it. If changes aren't controlled, it can lead to all sorts of problems. Inconsistent product quality, contamination, even safety issues. The change control process is designed to prevent those kinds of problems and make sure that any changes are made safely and responsibly.
It all goes back to maintaining that state of control we talked about earlier.
Exactly. And remember, documentation is really important for the whole change control process. The FDA will want to see records of the proposed change, why it's needed, who reviewed and approved it, and how it was implemented.
It's like a trail of breadcrumbs, showing how the manufacturing process has changed over time.
That's a great way to think about it. And it's a key part of showing that the company is following Subpart C.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get a grasp on this whole production and process controls thing. It's a lot to take in, but I can see how it all comes together to create a reliable system.
And we're still just scratching the surface of what Subpart C covers. But hopefully this gives you a better sense of how much detail goes into making sure the medicines we take are safe and effective.
It's been really eye-opening so far. I'm excited to see where our deep dive takes us next.
Get ready, because we're about to explore another interesting part of Subpart C, packaging and labeling controls.
Packaging and labeling. Now that's something I think we can all relate to.
You might think it's pretty simple, but in the world of pharmaceuticals, it's a lot more complicated than it seems. We're going to unpack how those medications are packaged and labeled to make sure they get to patients safely and effectively.
All right, packaging and labeling. I feel like this is something we see every day. What makes it so complicated when it comes to pharmaceuticals?
Yeah, it seems pretty basic, right? But in the pharmaceutical world, packaging and labeling, they're super important. We're talking patient safety and making sure the medication actually works. It's not just about making things look nice on the shelf.
Okay, so it's more than just looks. What's the big deal here?
Well, think about the last time you got a prescription. You have that bottle, right? With all the information on it, the name of the drug, how much to take, any warnings, and then there's usually that little paper leaflet inside with even more details. All of that's controlled by strict regulations under Subpart C.
So it's about getting the right information to the patient in a clear way.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. But it's also about the packaging itself. The packaging has to protect the medication and keep it from going bad, like those brown bottles that protect pills from light or those child-proof caps to prevent kids from accidentally taking something.
So the packaging is more than just information. It's actually protecting the medication itself.
Exactly. Subpart C, it covers everything. The materials they use for the packaging, the design of those caps and closures, making sure the container works with the medication and keeps it safe from the environment.
What could happen if the packaging isn't good enough?
Well, imagine a medication that's really sensitive to moisture. If it's in a container that isn't sealed properly, moisture could get in and make the medication less effective. Or what if you have a liquid medicine in a bottle that leaks? You could end up with spills, contamination, and even problems with getting the right dose.
Okay, I'm seeing why packaging is so important now. It's another way to protect both the medication and the patient. So what about the labeling? What are some of the specific rules there?
Well, Subpart C has very detailed rules about what has to be on the label. It has to be accurate, easy to understand, and clear. So things like the name of the medicine, the strength, what form it comes in, how to take it, how to store it, the expiration date, and of course, any warnings or precautions.
It sounds like they've thought of everything.
They really have. And it's not just about what's on the label, it's also about how it looks. The font has to be big enough to read easily, and the information has to be organized in a logical way. You don't want people squinting to read tiny print or struggling to find the dosage information.
Yeah, that's especially important with medication. It's all about making sure people take their medicine safely and correctly.
Exactly. And, those FDA inspectors will be looking at the labels very carefully. They'll be checking for accuracy, making sure it's easy to read, and that it meets all the requirements.
It's amazing how much detail goes into something as simple as packaging and labeling. It shows how much the pharmaceutical industry cares about patient safety and quality.
It really does. And it's a reminder that even the things we take for granted, like that pill bottle or the label on it, they're the result of a whole system that's designed to protect our health.
So, as we finish our deep dive into Subpart C, is there anything else we should highlight? We've talked about so many different things: building design, equipment, materials, production processes, packaging, and labeling. How does it all fit together?
That's a great question. It's really important to remember that Subpart C isn't just a list of rules to check off. It's about creating a whole system of quality and compliance that's part of everything in pharmaceutical manufacturing.
So it's not just about following the rules, it's about making quality part of how the entire organization operates.
That's it. And that's why those FDA inspectors, they're not just looking for problems with specific rules. They're looking at the whole quality system, the processes, the documentation, the training, even the attitudes of the people working in the facility.
They want to see that quality is built into everything the company does.
Exactly.
Right.
And when a company really has that kind of quality culture, following the regulations just becomes natural. It's not a chore, it's just how they do things.
So what's the most important thing for our listeners to take away from our deep dive into Subpart C?
I would say this. Subpart C, it's not just about buildings and equipment. It's about people. It's about keeping people safe who rely on medications, and it's about making sure the people working in the pharmaceutical industry can do their jobs safely and effectively. These rules, they can be complicated and tough, but in the end, they make the world a better place.
Well said. That wraps up our deep dive into the amazing world of Subpart C. We've covered a lot of ground, but hopefully everyone listening now has a better understanding of how much work goes into making sure the medicines we all depend on are safe and effective.
And don't forget, keep those contamination-proof fortresses strong and keep those medications flowing.
That's a wrap on our deep dive into Subpart C.